sorry for the distraction.
It's okay.
Lonzo gave these to me, and I'm not taking all of them home.
In that case, I should begin as narrator.
Yes, yeah.
We should introduce everybody first.
Well, that's what we're doing.
Oh, sorry.
Under where it says reader's theater script.
That's where I begin now?
No, we're going to start with Naomi.
Oh, okay.
All right, Naomi.
My name is Luna, and I'll be reading the part of Naomi, a Hebrew Jewish woman, now widowed and the mother-in-law of Ruth.
My name is Lisa, and I'll be reading the part of Ruth, a Moabite. That is a Gentile, a non-Jewish woman, now widowed and the daughter-in-law of Naomi. Oh, Mark, it's okay.
Where am I? Oh. My name is Reverend Marc, and I'll be reading the part of 3rd Isaiah, the author of final chapters 56, 66 of the book of Isaiah. Although not a participant in the scene here, his words belong in this conversation, so his voice has been introduced into the reader's theater.
My name is Penny, and I'll be reading the part of the author, the unknown writer who created the book of Ruth. In this role, I will offer behind-the-scenes comments to help you understand the story from the author's perspective. My name is Adair, and I'll be reading the part of Boaz, an upright Jewish man and a close relative of Naomi's deceased husband.
My name is Colby, and I'll be reading the part of the Hebrew Jewish townspeople and field workers of Bethlehem, the city to which Naomi returns with Ruth.
My name is Owen, and I'll be reading the part of the narrator. I won't do any silly voices, I'll just read. In this role, I will summarize the plot from the book of Ruth. I'll also help us transition from scene to scene, and I'll occasionally offer some extra insight into the text. Okay, we'll begin with a few background comments on the book of Ruth, and then we'll turn to the story itself.
I would like to introduce myself, but since I'm unknown, that's a little difficult. You see, like most of the books of the Bible, the book of Ruth does not identify its author. There's not even a tradition or legend about who I might be. So I'm about as unknown as they come. Even the date for my writing is unknown. Some scholars believe I wrote within a couple of generations of the story I tell. Maybe around the time of King David, 1000 BCE. But most of them place me hundreds of years later. That's because my message fits most clearly in the time after the exile, 500 to 600 years after King David, 500-400 BC. During these years, the people of Israel wrestled with the place of foreigners in the community of God's people.
Well, let me explain how we're dating things. This is probably why I tore my bow tie for emphasis. BCE means before the common era. It's the same timeline as BC, which means before Christ. But the designation BCE is used by scholars today to recognize that not everybody regards Jesus as the Christ. Still, Jesus' birth is what marks the beginning of the common era. So when you hear BCE, it simply means the number of years before the common era began, which is also the number of years before the birth of Jesus.
Okay. To make matters even more complicated, I am also an unknown author. I'm the voice behind the final chapters of the book of Isaiah. Virtually all scholars acknowledge that most of the first 39 chapters of Isaiah have roots in the actual prophet Isaiah, who was active from 740 to 687 BCE. That's right, before and right after Israel's northern 55 comes from a different voice and reflects a different time. This material is often referred to as 2nd Isaiah. It comes from an unnamed prophet active around that time of the Babylonian exile was ending, some 150 years later than the original Isaiah. And many scholars hear yet another voice in chapters 56 through 66, a third prophet who sees himself continuing the legacy of Isaiah, but who is now speaking to Israel's reality after they've returned from exile. Perhaps just a generation or two after 2nd Isaiah, that third voice is me.
I know this can all seem kind of complicated and a bit hard to follow. After all, this isn't your history, it's ours. But bear with us, because the history sets the context for understanding my story about Ruth. While this tale describes events that happened 500 years before the exile, when heard against the backdrop of Israel's life after the exile, it reveals an astonishing message about God.
So, before we turn to the tale, keep this in mind. In 722 BCE, the northern kingdom, comprising almost all of Israel, was conquered by the Assyrian Empire and scattered to the four winds. After 722 BCE, these 10 tribes were effectively lost to history. They're sometimes referred to as the lost tribes of Israel. About 130 years later, between 597 587 BCE, another regional superpower, Babylonian, conquered Assyria and swallowed up the last remnant of Israel, then known as the Kingdom of Judah. The last Israelites, members of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, were deported to Babylon, where they lived in exile for about 50 years.
Around 539 BCE, a third regional superpower arose, the Persian Empire led by Cyrus, and they conquered the Babylons. Cyrus decided to let the Israelites who had been living in exile in Babylon return to their homeland. Many of them did, and over the next 100 years, one of the driving theological questions for the people of Israel became, what went wrong? Why did the exile happen? One of the reasons most often given was that Israel had been too friendly with their neighbors, and the resulting intermarriages had led to their being attracted to foreign gods.
One response was an emphasis on ethnic purity. The book of Ezra and Nehemiah convey this response. First, a priest, Ezra, and then a governor, Nehemiah, declared that God was opposed to all intermarriage. But this wasn't the only view. There were other biblical voices, like mine, and the authors of both Ruth and Jonah. Those who understood God in ways that ran counter to Ezra and Nehemiah. So the story of Ruth offered itself to the imagination of Israel in the midst of this debate about how to treat foreigners and about how God regards foreigners. Most scholars consider the story of Ruth to be historical fiction or purposeful folklore. But that doesn't mean that it is less inspired than other imaginative tales like, say, Jesus' parables. Just like the parables, the truth of Ruth doesn't rest on the story it tells, but on the theology it offers.
Enough already. If I've done my work well, the story will stand on its own. You know the context now, so let's turn to the tale itself. I began by putting the two main characters in place, or more accurately, by putting them clearly out of place. Naomi is a Hebrew widow. Ruth is her daughter-in-law. Years earlier, during a famine, Naomi journeyed with her husband from the land of Israel to the land of Moab, only to have him die there, leaving her alone with two boys. The boys grew up, and both of them married Moabite women. But soon both of Naomi's sons died as well, and she is left only with two foreign daughter-in-laws in a foreign land. Now, to be a widow in your own land in the ancient world was bad enough. To be a widow in a foreign land
the rest of the chapter can be summed up in this. Naomi learns that there was food again in Israel, so she decides to return to her people. Although her two daughter-in-laws initially set out with her, Naomi does not wish for them to be out of place in her land. So she encourages them to stay in Moab and expresses her hope that each one of them may find security by finding a new husband among their own people someday. After a bit of protesting, one of her daughter-in-laws agrees to stay in Moab. But the other one, Ruth, is almost defiant in her loyalty to Naomi. And ultimately, Naomi allows Ruth to return with her to Bethlehem.
Wait, you can't sum it up and leave out the best parts. Think about this. An almost exclusively patriarchal society, I dare to write a short story featuring women. I dare to think that their feelings and their words might be memorable. In fact, at least a few scholars wonder whether might have been a woman storyteller myself to craft such lines for women. That is what Ruth said when Naomi encouraged her to go back to Moab.
Please don't ask me to leave you and turn away from your company. I swear to you, where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I'll die there too, and I'll be buried there beside you. I swear, may Yahweh be my witness and judge, that not even death will keep us apart.
No wonder Naomi relented and welcomed Ruth's company. These words have been echoed as expressions of fierce friendship, even borrowed for use in weddings for thousands of years since I've been known.
But remember this, Ruth, who makes this stunning pledge of loyalty, is a Moabite. Her people are cursed in the book of Deuteronomy, where it says that no Moabite shall be allowed to join the assembly of the Lord, not even after 10 generations, which is a fancy way of saying not ever. And after the exile, both Ezra and Nehemiah insist on breaking up all intermarriages between Hebrew men and Moabite women. Ruth carries some pretty significant ethnic baggage with her. But here, her loyalty to Hebrew widow is given an eloquence for God's loyalty to us.
I was blessed by Ruth's companionship. I knew that she would be an outsider among my people. But as a widow myself, I would also be an outsider even in my own land. Who can explain the depth of Ruth's loyalty to me? But who can question such loyalty either? Hers was a gift of grace to me. In a world where widowed women had nothing, we chose to have each other.
So the two women arrive in Bethlehem, where the relatives of Naomi's dead husband lived. The townspeople are abuzz with gossip at their arrival. Naomi has been gone for more than a decade, and she had left with a husband and 2 sons. Now here she is, a widow without children, in the company of a foreign woman. Her fortunes have changed, to say the least. They arrive in town just as the barley harvest is being gathered. And Ruth, showing compassion for her mother-in-law, offers to go into the fields to glean barley for them to eat, by chance or by providence. She gleans in the fields of Boaz, a kinsman of Naomi's husband. Hold on. So I'm supposed to read the whole thing?
Your thoughts.
Oh, did I just read the narrative?
No, it's okay. You did a good job. I didn't want to stop you. You did a good job.
Oh, I just got confused. Hold on, does everyone know what gleaning means? See, the people of Israel recognized that God wanted mercy shown to the poor, to those at the margins of society. Thus, Israelites' law required those harvesting the fields to leave a portion of the harvest in the field, so that the poor could follow behind and glean, that is, gather, this leftover grain for themselves. In this scene, Ruth sets aside any
myself. Why didn't I accompany Ruth into the fields? The story doesn't say. Perhaps I was simply too old, or perhaps the sorrows of my years had left me too frail to be much help. In any case, Ruth's gleaning, this care shown to me by a foreigner, my daughter-in-law, is what kept both of us alive.
When Boaz comes to the field where his workers are reaping the harvest, he notices Ruth, whom he does not recognize, falling behind his workers, and he inquires about her. The servant in charge tells him that she is a Moabite, the Moabite, who came back with Naomi. And he adds that Ruth has gleaned in the field tirelessly all day. In response, Boaz tells her that she is welcome to glean his fields. Indeed, he urges her to glean only in his fields and invites her to share the water provided for his workers. At the midday break, he invites her to sit with the reapers and share their meal. And afterwards, he instructs his servants to allow Ruth to glean even where they have not yet harvested, and to toss some extra barley on the ground for her to collect.
Okay, Bo.
I was quite overwhelmed by his generosity, and I told him so, while bowing low to the ground in front of him. That's how we show deep respect and honor to those whose place in life was far above our own. It wasn't that he just took his duty to the poor so seriously, but that he offered it so willingly to me, a foreigner. I had expected to be invisible, but he saw me.
Word travels quickly in a small town. Although I didn't recognize her in the field, I had already heard about this foreign woman, Ruth, and her faithful companionship to Naomi, the widow of her kinsman. So I was sincere when I said to her, "May Yahweh pay you in full for your loyalty. May you be richly rewarded by the Most High God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to find shelter." Ruth 2:11-12. In fact, as soon as I spoke my blessing, I was strangely aware it was she who had spread her wings of refuge over Naomi, and that it was I, through the barley in my fields, who was now spreading my wings of refuge around you both.
They say beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and when the eye belongs to a beholder who is just, mercy looks beautiful. We could just see that something sparked in Boaz already during that chance encounter in the field, but it all belittles it to call it love at first sight. Ruth was a young woman, to be sure, but she was widowed already, and after working the whole morning in the field, she was hardly in a state to catch anyone's eye. But we knew Boaz to be a man moved by justice, and when he looked at Ruth, he saw neither her physical beauty nor the toll of her years. He saw the mercy she showed Naomi, and that moved him deeply.
At the end of the day, after separating the grain from the straw, I had an ephah of barley, about enough to fill a 5-gallon bucket. It was a very good day of gleaning. And when Naomi saw how much I had gleaned, she immediately asked whose field I had been gleaning in, because she knew someone had been looking out for me.
When Ruth told me that she had been in the field belonging to Boaz, my heart leapt, because he was a relative of my dead husband. This was God's kindness, for sure. Most English Bibles say close relative or nearest kin, but this doesn't capture the full significance of my words. More accurately, in Hebrew, I told Ruth, "This Boaz is our Redeemer, trustee." Ruth chapter 2:20. Literally, he is the one with the right to redeem.
One with the right to redeem. That's a big deal. It means that I might well have two significant opportunities or obligations with respect to Naomi. First, unless an even closer kin came forward, I would have the right to redeem, to claim for my use, any lands that were held by Naomi's husband. Second, I also had the obligation to provide Naomi with an heir through the custom of levirate marriage. That meant that, whether or not I already had a wife, though I seem to have been unmarried, I had a duty to marry Naomi so that she might conceive and heir to care for her in her old age and to inherit her husband's land.
So Ruth gleaned in the fields of Boaz for the duration of the barley harvest, and for the wheat harvest as well. This lasted about 3 months, during which time Ruth became a familiar fixture, following behind Boaz's field workers, likely encountering Boaz on numerous occasions.
This was surely God's doing. for the Lord is merciful to the poor and needy. And Ruth's ability to glean all these months ensured that we would have food for a long time. But there is more than food to security. And in this era, the only real security for a woman was a husband, or at least a son to take care of her when she grew old. Because both Ruth and I neither husband nor children, I began to plan for our security.
Naomi instructed Ruth in how to seduce. She picked a night when she knew Boaz would be alone in the grain house. She told Ruth to bathe, put on some perfume, and to dress in her finest clothes. But Naomi also instructed her to hide until Boaz had eaten and fallen asleep. Then she was to go, lie down by Boaz, and uncover his feet and wait for him to tell her what to do.
Seduce is a little strong, I think. There are clear sexual overtones here, but this is really a desperate attempt by Naomi through Ruth to gain security for both of them. Knowing that she herself was told too old to bear a child, Naomi hoped that Boaz might be encouraged to redeem her family by taking Ruth as his wife and providing Naomi with an heir that way. Ruth's actions are pretty forward. In Hebrew, feet can be euphemisms for Gentiles.
They got cheese on them?
No, let's back
Or,
up.
yeah, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Can be for genitals.
Well,
So
good.
just
Thank you.
what is Naomi's suggestion that Ruth uncovers, but they're also, unmistakably vulnerable, regardless of what part of Boaz's physical anatomy she's uncovering. Ruth is also laying bare her future security, and that of Naomi as well. Boaz's response is far from certain, and she has everything to lose if this moment of sheer vulnerability on her part is not met with grace and mercy on his part.
I did just as my mother-in-law suggested. Once Boaz was asleep, I crept in and laid beside him, uncovering his feet. No wonder when he woke up in the middle of the night, he was startled to find me there. When he asked who I was, for he couldn't see me clearly in the darkness, I responded, "It's Ruth, your faithful one. Spread the corner of your cloak over me, for you are my family redeemer." I was not asking literally to be covered by a blanket. I was asking, begging, hoping that Boaz would take me as his wife.
When you realize what's happening here, that Ruth is hoping for an heir, that she is asking Boaz to father a child with her, a child that will become not his heir, but Naomi's heir, you can see just how uncovered his feet are, and just how desperate her hope is.
I suppose I was startled. Wouldn't you be? But what truly astonished me yet again was Ruth's compassion for Naomi. I told her, "May Yahweh bless you, my child. You have shown yourself even more loyal to the family than you did before. You could have sought someone younger, whether poor or rich." Ruth 3:10. Ruth was under no obligation to provide Naomi with an heir. She could have married solely for herself. By coming to me, she made clear that she had bound up her security with Naomi's. Even within a family, such loyalty is rare. And here was a Moabite widow, someone who was not one of us, offering it to Naomi.
Boaz pledged to on the spot to fulfill Ruth's request, noting that all the Hebrews knew that she, Ruth, was a woman, quote, of great character and integrity, despite being a Moabite. But she also cautions that he knows that there's one relative closer to Naomi's husband than he is, and that person has the first right to redeem if he wishes to.
Suddenly my vulnerability becomes all too clear. Having just offered myself to this man that I'd come to trust over the past several months, I now learn that first thing the next morning, I might be passed on to a complete stranger. This isn't a betrayal on the part of Boaz. He's simply determined to do everything with honor. But in a patriarchal society, honor is measured more by the minds of men than by the lives of women.
True to his word, Boaz goes to the city gate the next morning because this is where the men gather to do the town's business. As soon as he spots the other relative, one who has the first right to redeem, he calls him over and gathers 10 elders of the city to act as witnesses. He explains that Naomi wants to sell the land that belonged to her dead husband and that Boaz is willing to redeem the land for himself, but knows that this other man has first rights if he wishes to claim them.
And of course, this other relative says yes, he'll redeem the land. Who wouldn't want to expand their estate a bit? So he'll buy it from Naomi, and she can live off the proceeds until they're exhausted. But then Boaz adds a little fine print. He mentions that whoever redeems the land also gets Ruth. And Ruth comes with the obligations to sire an heir. All of a sudden, this isn't such a good deal. Let's see. He pays to buy the land. He picks up the cost of having a wife. He accepts the duty to father a child. And this child will have a lineage traced back to Naomi's husband, not to him. And will one day inherit away from his family the very land he's spending money to buy today. This is no longer a good business deal. And so he renounces his right to redeem and offers it to Boaz.
I immediately claimed my right to redeem, announcing to the elders, "You are witness this day that I have bought all of Elimelech's property from Naomi, as well as the property of her 2 sons. Further, I will marry Ruth, the Moabite widow, in order to keep the name of our dead relative connected with the property, so that his name will not be forgotten among our relatives or in their town records. You are my witnesses this day." Ruth 4:9-10. Those few words sold and bought the land and effectively married Ruth to me as well.
True enough, those few words put everything that had been out of place, myself, my husband's land, and my daughter-in-law, back in place.
But we, the ordinary people gathered by the gate alongside the elders, we also offered words that shaped this passing of property and people. We said this blessing: may Yahweh make Ruth, who is about to come into your home, to be like Rachel and Leah, the two who built up the family of Israel. May the children Yahweh gives to you make your family like the family of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. Our words of blessing set this otherwise ordinary transaction within the extraordinary story of God's care for God's people.
Extraordinary indeed. You probably recognize Leah and Rachel as the 2 sisters married by Jacob. Along with their respective maidservants, they gave Jacob 12 sons who became the 12 tribes of Israel. To liken a Moabite woman to the very foremothers of Israel is a pretty daring blessing. As for Tamar, she was a widow whose right to levirate marriage was denied generations earlier, and who needed her own help, a desperate seduction to gain an heir and thus continue the bloodline that eventually led to my own birth 6 generations later.
I suppose in this moment, I could have felt like just another part of the property changing hands. In some ways, that's exactly what I was. But remember, I was moving from a place of sheer vulnerability to a place of security. And Naomi was coming with me. We were being gathered together into the household of a man we knew to be both just and merciful. We had a future before us again, and that was cause for wordless gratitude on my part.
And so Boaz took Ruth as his wife. Naomi was made safe as a member of the household. And in time, God blessed Boaz and Ruth with a son.
When he was born, we rejoiced with our kinswoman Naomi. We said to her, "Praised be Yahweh, who has not abandoned you, but provided you yet with another redeemer. May this child's name be remembered through all of Israel, and give you renewed life and support when you are old. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and has proven better than 7 sons, has given birth to him."
Filled with joy, I took my grandson into my arms, and cradling him, I saw hope in this tiny babe, not just for myself and for Ruth, but for all of God's children. For the story that led to his birth is a witness to the God who seeks always to care for the poor, to bring the outcast in, to invite those at the margins to the center, and who does all these things through the choices that we human beings make. And in this story, Ruth and Boaz and I were privileged to make choices that invited God to act in our lives.
And so the story ends like this, quote, "And Naomi's neighbors named the child, saying, quote, 'A son has been born to Naomi. We will call him Obed,' which means faithful one. And Obed begot Jesse, and Jesse begot David." Ruth 4:17.
It all ends so quickly that when you hear it today, 2,500 years late after I wrote it, you might think I'm simply bringing it all together and closing it up. But actually, this burst everything wide open. This single verse takes the whole story to another level. Remember the context in which I wrote David was Israel's greatest king, but 500 years after his rule and with the much more recent pain of exile fresh in their hearts, the Israelites are wrestling with how to share their land and their faith with foreigners. Ezra and Nehemiah have called for the expulsion of all foreign wives from among the people of Israel, specifically naming Moabite women as among those needing to be expelled. And here, in the middle of this wrestling, sits my story of Ruth. I lift up from our past a Moabite woman who displays loyalty to family and a faith in God equal to any biblical hero. And I celebrate her intermarriage with Boaz, which keeps alive a bloodline that would otherwise have died out. A bloodline that in just 2 more generations will produce David, and David the shepherd king.
In fact, some of the most stirring words crafted in the midst of this same struggle are these, quote, "Foreigners who would follow Yahweh should not say Yahweh will surely exclude me from this people," end quote. That was exactly what Ezra and Nehemiah were doing to the women like Ruth. But I respond, "For thus says Yahweh, the foreigners who join themselves to me, ministering to me, loving in the name of Yahweh and worshiping me, all who observe the Sabbath and do not profane it, and cling to my covenant, these I will bring to the holy mountain and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices will be acceptable on the altar. For my house will be called a house of prayer for all peoples. Thus saith the sovereign Yahweh, who gathers the diaspora and the scattered ones of Israel. There are others I will gather beside those already gathered." Isaiah 56:3, 6-8.
I like to think that my short story about Ruth and her acceptance into the people of God sowed seeds that bore fruit in Martin Luther King's famous quote, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Grounded in the conviction of God's gracious and surprising love, that was my hope and Ruth's hope, and Isaiah's hope. Is it yours too?"
Thank y'all so much. Give me a
That's
hand.
it. Thank you, David.
At the beginning, I mentioned what 2 major things happened during the story.
Somebody got married.
Somebody got married.
Feet got exposed.
Well,
Feet
About it, exposed.
feet got exposed.
presumably,
Someone got the
Any other
take off
major
the
things?
piece.
yes, that's true.
Take it off
Yeah.
the
They
piece.
took the cover off the feet.
Yep.
the bloodline. From this story came what they said was the most amazing king that.
Yeah, that should not be brushed under the rug. I didn't interrupt you.
No, absolutely.
Just, this was coming at a time where Israel was trying to rebuild an identity that they lost for 500 years. And some people were saying, in order to build it back, we gotta separate the wheat from the chaff. We'll put it in a very succinct way, like Nehemiah when they rebuilt the wall and people of that nature. But here's the counterpoint. It says, well, and this isn't new, by the way. This is all the way back in Deuteronomy with who the 10 spies, Mark? Who hid the 10 spies? I can't remember her name. It starts with an R. In any event, she was a foreign woman who assisted the Israelites when they were conquering the Promised Land, and she was reintroduced into the Israelite people as one accepted like they are by the merit of who they were, just like Ruth. And I think that's very important to remember even now. So yeah.
Absolutely.
When you say reestablish the bloodline, but David was not a descendant of Boaz. David was before Boaz, is that correct?
No, after.
I believe it's after.
So was David a descendant?
It was 3 lines. He was a third generation, I guess you could say.
David's a descendant.
Following.
But David was a descendant of Boaz. It's interesting because the definition of a Jew is anyone who's born of a Jewish mother. And I've had Jewish friends whose grandparents were Catholic, and they've been subject to the politics of exclusion, not allowed to see the required descent from
Yeah, and there was a lot of excluding going on during that time, but she was included. So I'm worried that was the difference, that they accepted her as them. They brought her into the fold, basically, with everyone.
In the fifth line of Genesis, Renewal moves across the face of the earth. Renewal, the spirit. So Ruth is a spirited woman, whereas if you're ruthless, you have no spirit. There was in North Carolina, if an apple falls on the ground in an orchard, you can go onto private land and pick up any apple from the ground, but not from the tree. If you're in Georgia, if you have a pecan tree, the pecan falls on public land on the roadside, it's still owned by the owner of the pecan tree, and you're not allowed to
Rules are different from state to
pick
state,
it up.
right?
You're not allowed. And as you
It did
drive,
stop me from driving and pulling peaches off the peach trees up there. I don't know what the rule is in South Carolina, but I picked many a peach that was not mine.
The rule that day was you were hungry.
That's right, that's right. Sure.
there was a woman in my neighborhood growing up in the 60s and 70s, and she lived alone in a huge house. If you drive from here to Florida going on back roads, you go through cotton fields. And you see all the unpicked cotton after the machines have come through and done the bales. And so you could go glean that cotton if you wanted to. But fortunately, people no longer manually have to pick cotton in that time. But she had, growing up, she owned 110 acres of Mississippi Delta land, the richest cotton land on earth. And she had lost early in life her father, her husband, a son and a grandson to different diseases and car wrecks. And so she was just the opposite. She was a very wealthy widow who had lost all male heirs. And in the 1965, 66, she was the only adult in my neighborhood who spoke out against the war in Vietnam because people were losing their sons for no good reason. She was a Ruth-like figure. So,
yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe he was good at one mile. flashy bow tie.
You didn't even know that you were.
I was thinking of doing a voice, but that'd be a little over the top. I think. There's a big,
Can everybody take their chair and put it up?
yes.
Ooh, wee.
Oh, I should close.
So sweet.